Pay close attention to this security camera footage. February 19, 2024. In Stamford, Connecticut. A camera mounted in the backyard of apartment 214 captured exactly 41 seconds. You see an elderly white man, 81 years old, sitting in a wheelchair right in front of the sliding glass door. A Latina woman, 34 years old, wearing navy blue scrubs, steps out from inside the apartment, carrying a folded blanket. She bends down. She places her hand on his shoulder, whispers something the camera doesn't pick up, and then leans in and kisses him right on the lips. A slow, soft, affectionate kiss, lasting nearly 4 seconds. He raises his hand to hold her face, as if wanting to hold on to that moment. Then Emma stands up, steps behind the wheelchair, and pushes Harold back inside. 7:37 p.m. They disappear from the camera's view. This is the last time Emma Reyes was seen alive. The next morning, a maintenance worker discovered a trail of dried blood on the basement concrete floor. Following the trail to storage room B14, the door slightly ajar. Inside, they found Emma Reyes, her hands bound with plastic zip ties, her head and face disfigured from multiple heavy blows, clothes intact, no items missing, and drag marks on the floor, showing she had been pulled in here after the attack. She had been dead all night, while no one knew they were searching for someone who no longer had a chance to return. At first glance, it might seem like a random attack, a stranger striking and vanishing. Wrong. This is a story about $1.3 million, a changed will, and a family willing to eliminate anyone standing between them and the money they believe is rightfully theirs. Before that final camera clip captured Emma Reyes alive, before her death shook the entire city of Stamford, there was a longer, warmer, and far more heartbreaking story unfolding inside apartment 214. Harold Whitman, 81, widowed for 5 years, lived alone in an apartment, so large people said it felt more like a museum than a home. His wife had died suddenly from cancer, leaving a void nothing could fill. His 2 children, Brian Whitman, 52, and Sarah Whitman, 49, rarely visited. They were busy with jobs, their own families, and perhaps accustomed to letting their father fend for himself. In late 2023, Harold suffered a minor stroke, not life-threatening, but enough to impair his ability to care for himself. Doctors ordered full-time caregiving, and that's when Emma Reyes entered his life. Emma, 34, a nurse with nearly a decade of experience, was loved by many patients and families. She was gentle, attentive, and knew how to build trust in those accustomed to loneliness. But in the early days, Harold didn't talk much. He answered curtly, avoided her eyes, even showed irritation when she helped him change shirts or do exercises. People who have lived alone for years often build an invisible wall to avoid feeling more loss. Emma understood that, and she was patient. She shared small stories about her school days, her mother's cooking, how she liked listening to jazz in the evenings. Harold didn't respond, but she could tell he was listening. On the 7th day, Emma played Sinatra while helping him practice walking with a frame. For the first time, Harold smiled, a faint smile, but enough for Emma to know the wall was starting to crack. Then everything changed faster than anyone could have imagined. Emma read him old letters his wife had written, letters Harold had kept carefully for decades. She cooked him chicken soup exactly the way his wife used to. She patiently worked through physical therapy with him step by step, never letting him give up. Neighbors said Harold looked 10 years younger, and Harold began asking Emma if she'd eaten lunch, if she was getting enough rest, questions a long isolated person never asks anyone else. His trust in Emma didn't come from needing care, it came from feeling understood, from being truly seen. Then one winter evening, while Emma was folding a towel on the sofa, Harold suddenly burst into tears. Not loud, not dramatic, just choked sobs pulled from the deepest place of longing. He said his wife's name, said he was afraid he'd forget her voice. Emma didn't reply. She walked over, hugged him, and when Harold looked up, eyes red, she kissed him. Not a kiss of physical passion, but a kiss between two lonely souls finding each other in a moment when both thought they had nothing left to lose. From that night on, they were no longer patient and caregiver. They became something closer, more human, more real. A relationship without a name, but with profound meaning for both. And Harold, who once thought the rest of his life was just waiting for death, began wanting to live longer. One January afternoon, Harold called his personal attorney to the apartment. He requested changes to his will, $1.3 million, the dark green vintage Cadillac he'd kept since 1979, and apartment 214, all to Emma Reyes. When the attorney asked why, Harold answered without hesitation, "She's the reason I'm still alive." Harold signed. Emma didn't know about it. But that decision, born from pure gratitude and affection, made her a target to be eliminated at any cost. Things began to crack in late January, when Brian showed up unannounced. He walked into apartment 214, just as Emma leaned down to kiss Harold lightly on the cheek, before adjusting the blanket on his shoulder. It wasn't a casual or routine caregiving gesture. It was intimate, close, lingering long enough to leave Brian frozen for a few seconds. He stood at the threshold, hand still on the doorknob, face rigid, eyes devouring the scene. When Emma went to the kitchen, Brian walked straight to Harold, voice low but furious. "What are you letting her do, Dad?" Harold didn't answer, just looked at him with a mix of exhaustion and disappointment. The next day, Sarah visited. She walked into the kitchen and saw Emma helping Harold grip a spoon, his hand in hers, Emma smiling as he cracked a joke. Sarah froze. She couldn't remember the last time she'd held her father's hand like that, and that feeling, guilt, anger, jealousy, surged into an uncontrollable explosion. As soon as Emma stepped into the living room, Sarah pulled her aside, voice icy. "What are you doing with my father?" Emma, startled, tried to explain, but Sarah cut her off. "We know your type of caregiver. Act kind, get close, then start controlling people. You think we're blind?" Those baseless accusations reached Harold in the kitchen. For the first time in years of silent endurance, he snapped, voice trembling with anger. "Sarah, shut up. You weren't here when I needed someone." The room fell suffocatingly silent. Sarah turned away, face flushed from being scolded by her own father in front of Emma. Brian, standing near the window, clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. Both left the apartment that afternoon in silence. But it wasn't peaceful. It was thick with humiliation, hurt and suspicion. And as those emotions fermented, they turned into something more dangerous. Absolute conviction that Emma was exploiting an elderly man to steal the inheritance. 3 days later, on a bleak cold morning, Sarah received a call from Harold's attorney's office. She answered, still angry from the confrontation. But the secretary's voice stopped her cold. "Miss Sarah, I think you should know your father changed his will 2 weeks ago." Sarah felt her heart drop. She asked for details, and the secretary, with rare sympathy in that profession, informed her that most of the assets, including $1.3 million, apartment 214, and the vintage Cadillac, had been transferred to Emma Reyes. Not Brian, not Sarah, not the family trust. Sarah gripped the phone, barely breathing. Sarah gripped the phone, barely breathing. Brian arrived at her house just 20 minutes after hearing the news. Sarah was still shaking. "You heard, right?" Brian nodded, face pale with rage. "She's going to take everything," Sarah said through gritted teeth. "She shows up to care for Dad for a few months, and becomes the heir. What the hell is that?" Brian looked straight at his sister, eyes hardening with a calculation that had never been there before. "No," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "She's not getting it. Unless she's no longer here." Sarah didn't respond immediately. But looking into Brian's eyes, she knew he meant it. They fell silent, but this silence was different. It was no longer shame or anger. It was agreement, a decision, a line just crossed. And from that moment, Emma Reyes, the woman who had made Harold want to live again, became the target they believed had to be removed to reclaim what was theirs. After the will shock, Everything between Brian and Sarah shifted from rage to cold, calculated planning, unlike anything they'd ever done. In their minds, Emma was no longer a person. She became the sole obstacle between them and the money they believed belonged to the Whitman family. And the plot formed faster than they expected. Sarah, one evening at her dining table with her laptop open, logged into the caregiving app Harold had once shared, so the family could monitor Dad's health. But her purpose now was entirely different. The app showed Emma's schedule, arrival times, breaks, when she took Harold out for walks, even when her shift ended, and she left the apartment. Not only that, the doorbell camera Harold had installed for extra safety became Sarah's tool. Every night, she reviewed footage to note when Emma left. 7:33, 7:40, 7:36. Almost unchanging. That was what they needed. Routine. Predictability. Brian handled the part he believed suited him better. He called an old acquaintance, Ray Dalton, 41, previously imprisoned for assault, now doing odd jobs as a loader, and carrying debts that made him accept anything for money. They met in the parking lot behind a rundown shopping center. No cameras, no one paying attention to Brian's old sedan. Ray sat in the passenger seat, the faint smell of old cigarettes on his jacket. Brian didn't beat around the bush. "I need you to handle something." He placed a thick envelope on the dashboard. $7,500. Cash. Ray looked at Brian, at the envelope, back at Brian. "Handle it how?" Brian answered in a flat, steel-cold voice. "She can't show up anymore." Ray was silent for a few seconds, weighing not morality, but legal risk. "You want me to scare her, or?" Brian cut in. "No, I want her finished, and no breath left behind." Ray nodded slowly, the nod of someone who'd done similar before. In the following days, the siblings continued monitoring Emma via the app and doorbell camera. They identified the building's biggest vulnerability, the basement storage area. No cameras, because security only covered main areas and entrances. Brian took Ray to the basement one early morning, showed him room B14, an unused empty space. "Here," Brian said. "No one comes down after 7 p.m. Ray scouted the area, tested the door, checked echoes. "Quick, discreet," he noted. "No one will hear." Sarah waited in the parking lot, palms sweaty. She'd never imagined getting involved in something like this. But then she remembered Brian's words. Unless she's no longer here. Sarah convinced herself they were protecting the family, reclaiming what belongs to blood. That self-deception became the excuse to go deeper into the abyss. By the weekend, everything was ready. They knew Emma would leave around 7:36 p.m. They knew Harold would be in the bedroom, listening to music or watching TV, unaware. They knew the basement would be empty. No further planning needed. Brian's final words to Ray before handing him the basement key. "Make it clean. No traces. And remember, no breath left behind." Ray pocketed the key. "Got it." As he walked away, Sarah watched, feeling something in their lives had crossed an irreversible line. But no one said it aloud. No one wanted to admit they had just signed Emma Reyes's death warrant. The woman whose only fault was making Harold feel loved one more time. On the night of February 19th, at exactly 7:30 p.m., Ray Dalton was already in storage room B14, as Brian had designated. The door unlocked, pitch dark inside. Ray stood motionless in the shadows, holding a heavy industrial rubber mallet and zip ties wrapped around his wrist. He knew exactly when Emma would leave. Every habit provided by the Whitman siblings. 7:36 p.m. The backyard camera captured Emma's final kiss with Harold, but in the basement, Ray just checked his watch, breathing steadily, waiting for familiar footsteps. At 7:49 p.m., Emma started heading to the parking area, taking the less traveled route through the basement. Ray moved quietly to the door, keeping close enough to follow, far enough not to be noticed. As Emma passed the ajar door, Ray lunged from the darkness, grabbing her from behind. The hard yank slammed her head against the concrete wall with a dry thud. She panicked, tried to scream, but Ray clamped her mouth with a heavy hand. Emma struggled, nails scratching his arm, but Ray's pull was nearly impossible to resist. He dragged her into B14, and from that drag came the blood trail the maintenance worker found the next morning. Sid. Ray locked the door, shoved Emma onto the cold concrete floor. Emma tried to crawl away, but Ray grabbed her wrists, tightening zip ties until they cut into skin. Another for the other hand. She gasped, eyes full of terror, voice trembling. "I haven't done anything wrong. Please stop." But Ray, avoiding her eyes, said curtly, emotionless, "It's not me who wants this. I'm just following orders." And then he began beating her. Blows to the head, shoulders, back, relentless, heavy, merciless. Blows not to restrain, but to destroy resistance. Emma tried to dodge, twist, push her back against the wall to shield her head, but each time she protected one part, Ray shifted and struck another. Heavy impacts echoed in the small room, her breathing ragged, then she collapsed. But Ray didn't stop. Later forensic analysis concluded, at least 12 blows, and many delivered, after she could no longer defend herself. He only stopped when certain the body before him no longer moved. Then Ray grabbed her ankles, dragged her to a corner, covered her with an old tarp, like discarding worthless junk. No hesitation. Not one glance back at her face. At the far end of the basement, Brian waited in his black SUV, hands gripping the wheel, eyes on the clock. When Ray emerged from the dark hallway, wiping sweat with his sleeve, Brian rolled down the window. "Done?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. Ray nodded. Just that. No more words. The SUV pulled out at 8:11 p.m., slipping into the night, as if nothing had happened. In the dark room B14, Emma Reyes lay there, unknown, unheard, unfound, until morning light revealed the horror Stamford would never forget. The investigation began the next morning, and within less than 24 hours, forensics realized the scene didn't match a random attack. The long blood trail on the concrete showed Emma was dragged, while nearly unconscious, and the blood pattern proved she was struck from behind, not facing her attacker. Injuries to head and shoulders, angle, force, tissue indentation, all matched a single weapon, industrial rubber mallet. Most crucially, no signs of robbery, wallet, phone, jewelry, all intact. This wasn't the work of a random stranger. This was premeditated murder with personal motive and preparation. As police collected digital evidence, the full story lit up like a map. At 7:34 p.m., 2 minutes before the CCTV captured the final kiss, GPS from Sarah Whitman's phone showed she opened the app tracking Emma's schedule. A small action, but perfect proof she was monitoring in real time. Simultaneously, traffic cameras at the complex exit captured Brian Whitman's black SUV leaving the garage at 8:11 p.m., perfectly matching the timeline of the attack right after Emma reached the parking area. When police questioned Brian at his home, he tried to stay calm, but his fumbling over times raised immediate suspicion. Sarah repeatedly insisted Emma was very suspicious, and my family was being deceived. Words that sounded more like deflection than anything else. But the biggest breakthrough came from Ray Dalton. He was arrested after a gas station camera captured his license plate, matching descriptions from nearby residents. Within hours in interrogation, Ray broke and confessed everything. He admitted the $7,500 from Brian Whitman, how Brian gave him the basement key, and the chilling instruction, "Don't leave any breath behind." What destroyed any chance of denial for the Whitman siblings was recovered text from Brian's phone. "Tonight," and Sarah's reply, "Make sure she's gone." At that point, the investigation shifted from finding the killer to preparing for one of Stamford's biggest trials in years. When the trial opened, prosecutors charged murder for financial gain, first-degree murder conspiracy, evidence tampering, and other counts. The courtroom fell dead silent when the key evidence played. The 41-second CCTV clip, the final kiss between Emma and Harold. No one spoke when it ended. One juror covered their mouth, another bowed their head to steady themselves. Because in that moment, the truth wasn't just clear, it was agonizing. Emma Reyes didn't die from robbery, didn't die from occupational risk, didn't die from a momentary mistake. She died because of the greed of people sharing the Whitman name, People who couldn't accept that their father had found someone to love after years of emptiness. When the prosecutor concluded, no one in the room doubted, this conspiracy wasn't just cruel, it was utterly inhuman. A murder plot, executed solely over a will and $1.3 million they believed was theirs. The sentence for Brian and Sarah Whitman was handed down on the afternoon of June 14, 2024. But the heaviest blow wasn't felt by the jury, the prosecutor, or the two at the defendant's table. It was felt by Harold Whitman, the father they claimed to be protecting. When Harold learned Emma had been murdered and that his own children were behind it, his heart seemed crushed. He was hospitalized for heart failure, just 2 days after the first hearing. Doctors said he didn't have much fight left, but those close to him understood better. Harold didn't die from illness. He died from heartbreak, from losing the only woman who brought him back to life, and from the betrayal by the 2 children he had once loved unconditionally. 6 weeks later, Harold passed away in his hospital room, window cracked to let late afternoon light fall on his deeply weary face. Before closing his eyes, he held the nurse's hand and spoke his final words, voice so faint, it was almost just breath. All I wanted was for her to live. Not money, not status, not anything his family once thought he cared about. Just Emma Reyes' life, the woman who made him want one more day. When Harold died, his attorney announced something no one in the Whitman family was prepared for: the harm beneficiary clause in the revised will. Under Connecticut state law, if any heir causes harm, directly or indirectly, to a beneficiary, they forfeit all inheritance rights, and the assets go to the charity designated by the testator. Brian and Sarah, convicted of murder for financial gain, were automatically disinherited. Everything they tried to keep, everything they were willing to kill for, vanished, in the literal sense. The $1.3 million, the vintage Cadillac Harold always cherished, and apartment 214, where Emma once wheeled him every evening, all transferred to the Emma Reyes Care Foundation, a newly established fund to support caregivers threatened, abused, or attacked on the job. Emma's name, once seen by them as a threat, ultimately became the symbol of compassion Harold wanted the world to remember. At the joint memorial for Harold and Emma held afterward, neighbors, nurses, and colleagues of Emma attended. No one mentioned money, no one mentioned the case, only stories of kindness, of Emma's gentle smile as she tucked an extra blanket around a patient in winter, of how she made Harold laugh every morning, and whispered stories about Brian and Sarah, 2 people who single-handedly destroyed their own family because of bottomless greed. Emma cared for him like family, but it was the people with his blood who decided she had to die. In many families, evil doesn't come from outside, it comes from greed. If you found this story helpful and want to hear more cases analyzed in detail like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. Thank you for watching to the end. See you in the next story.